Okay, so talking really quick about, we're talking about the conspiracy stuff. I want to say that, there's actually, according to scientists, quote unquote, there's 3 levels of a conspiracy. But I was talking to my grandpa. My grandpa said that there's probably a 4th level. The 4th level is a cosmic conspiracy. We see that everything fits the form. Everything seems to manifest from this quadrant. So the question is that a conspiracy? That's a conspiracy? Everything in reality derives from this pattern. So even the conspirators are being conspired against, if that's the case. Even the people with the strings have strings on them. Okay. That's what it seems like. Okay. Thanks, man. It's funny. Remember, I was talking about the grapes that the tree of knowledge would had rabbis think that it was grapes, not fruit. Here's the grapes right here. All right. So, let's go. All right. So we're talking about the Gnostic Gospels. Gnostics means knowledge. These people saw God as an imperfect God, and they thought that that the body is a prison, and that the whole goal is to break out of the body and gain knowledge, to break out of this prison, ego, enclosure called the body, and this matrix that we live in. They didn't call it the matrix, but they said it's a fake world, and to see the real world, to see reality in its true form. I want to say one thing. Miriam and I think it was Joshua were complaining that Moses was having some non-Israelite wives, and they were like, they're just really upset about this. And then God heard Miriam complaining about this. They were gossiping. Remember, when you gossip, you make yourself feel better by putting other people down. And God was pissed. So God said, listen, and this is interesting. He says, Moses knows the form of the Lord. He didn't need to see it through visions. He didn't need to see it through dreams. He was just shown straight up the form of the Lord. And, he says that Moses is the most humble person in the world. It's funny because the person who was supposed to have written Genesis was Moses, and he wrote it through God, so that would be Moses writing. Moses is the most humble person in the world. But he says, he was shown the form of the Lord. He says, here you are, Miriam, complaining about this guy. And then right then, and they wanted to disobey Moses. They're like, why do we want to follow this guy? He's having these non-Israelite wives. And then God punished Miriam with leprosy or some sort of disease. And then, Aaron, I think maybe it was Aaron, I forget who it was, got upset. And he was like, oh, we need to save Miriam. So then they sacrificed. Remember, there's always a sacrifice. And then her sins were absolved, and she became not sick. You have to remember that in the Bible, whenever somebody is sick, it is because of their sin. So you see it throughout the whole Bible. When people are sinning, there's cases where the Israelites start to have non-Israelite wives, and this is a sin. And then all of a sudden a plague hits them. And the reason why the plague hits them, whenever these diseases happen, it's because of the sin. It's because of the disobedience. So we always see, remember, the 4th quadrant. Contemplation, passion, flowing, knowing. Knowing. This is death. It always comes out of disobedience. This is the 2nd quadrant. Believe, faith, behave, belong. If you believe, have faith, behave, and belong, nothing bad happens to you. It's like you're in the garden. Everything is nice and happy. But once you disobey, remember, the disobedience was biting out of the tree of knowledge, then death comes. So disobedience is knowledge. When you disobey, it's knowing, it's death. So remember, we have the antagonism right here. So yeah, I could talk about that stuff more, but okay. So I'm going to make a very, very big claim. Some may see this as it might upset some people, but I studied, and this is what is very obvious after reading the Bible. Actually, let me first talk about something else. The first thing I want to talk about is ways that you can understand Jesus's Gospels, the Gospels of Jesus. So, let me just give some examples. One thing that happens is Jesus is in this building. I'm just going to give a few examples, hopefully, but the whole thing is like this. Jesus is in a building, and he's healing people, according to this story. And then there's 4 people holding a crippled guy. So you see the cross, the quadrant. These 4 people are carrying a crippled guy on, a mat, each on a different corner. And they see the crowd is all in this room, and they're all pushing each other. They're all trying to get the Jesus to be healed. And they say, you know what? Let's go on the roof, and we can cut through the roof and then get to Jesus. So they thought outside the box. They thought there's another way to get to him. They thought, you know what? We don't want to fight with all this group of people. We don't want to push around. This is what most people want to do. They want to push through the group, try to win, try to outcompete everybody, and then they want to get healed. But they're all not going to get healed doing that. But they think, you know what? We can think of a different way where we could avoid the crowd. Remember, flowing. When you flow, you're not worried about other people. You're just doing it, without thinking for nobody's sake. But when you behave, you're doing it. You're worried about other people. When you do, you're doing it. You're worried about your ego, how you look, competing with other people. But flowing, that competition is absolved. So they think, okay, let's go through the roof. So they go up on the roof. They cut through the roof. They get brought down, and right away Jesus heals them, or heals the crippled man. So there's the idea. They broke out of this competition mindset that you see in society now, and and apparently this is the mindset that would get somebody crippled, the sin that crippled this man. But then they see a way around it to break out of the competition, to flow, and then the guy's healed. Okay, another example. There's this guy, I think his name was Zacharias, and he was a tax collector. You have to remember, Jesus always healed the people who were outsiders of the community. The people who are pariahs. This is the people who Jesus liked the most. It's not the people who behaved and belonged, had faith. These were the Pharisees. Remember, the Pharisees were second quadrant. It was a second quadrant philosophy. They thought you got to obey the laws. You got to be, and remember, they gossiped about the tax collectors and stuff. But Zacharias, he was a Jewish man who was a tax collector. And what do the Jews think about him? They hate him. Why? Because he's a tax collector for the Romans. He's a traitor. The Jews are under the thumb of the Romans right now. And Zacharias is, breaking people's thumbs. He's making everybody upset, because if they don't pay, he's obviously going to have thugs come get them, take their money. He's a tax collector. Also, interestingly, Zacharias it says that he is a small person, but the way it's said in Hebrew, he's a midget. And people say that's a politically incorrect term. So I don't hurt anybody's feelings, he's a dwarf, but it's the same. The way that it's a derogatory term, the way it's said in Hebrew. So, but I'll just say, small person. I'll just say small person because I don't want to hurt anybody's feelings too much, hopefully. But okay, so he was a small person. But this is the idea. He didn't belong. Just think about it. Probably growing up, the other Israelite kids are making fun of him. Hey, look at Zacharias, the small guy. Ha, let's make fun of him. They probably kicked him around. So Zacharias is thinking, man, he's an outsider. He's a pariah. He doesn't belong. So he thinks, you know what? I'm going to get back at these guys who made fun of me my whole life. I'm going to be a tax collector. And probably they don't accept them in their other jobs. They said, oh, you can't be a carpenter. You're too small. You can't do this. You're too small. So what's the only avenue open for him? The Romans say, hey, Zacharias, you want to be a tax collector for us? He says, okay, I'll do that. So he's a pariah. He doesn't belong. So he becomes a tax collector. And everybody doesn't like him because he's a tax collector. So Jesus is walking by and everybody's, crowding around. And Zacharias sees a tree. And he climbs on top of the tree. What does he do? He breaks out of the crowd. It's all metaphorical. The crowd is all, there's this crowd of people trying to get to Jesus, touch Jesus and stuff. But Zacharias climbs on top of a tree so he can see him. So what does this represent? This represents him breaking out of the conformity, breaking out of the crowd, what everybody else is doing. He goes to a higher position on the tree. This is metaphorical of the flow. So and then he sees Jesus. This is metaphorical of him, getting in the flow, getting in the zone, breaking out of the crowd. Now he's, just so he can see Jesus. And then Jesus says, hey, Zacharias, do you want to come eat with me? Eat dinner with me? It almost brings tears to my eyes because this is such a beautiful story. Zacharias doesn't belong. And then here, he climbs the tree, and it's because he doesn't belong. He wants to see this guy who everybody's talking about, this guy who can do what people are saying, these miracles. He climbs up on top of the tree, he's broken out of the crowd, and then he gets offered to go eat dinner with Jesus in the story. So it's a beautiful story. Then we have another story where there's a lot of blind people. There's a group of blind people, and then Jesus is walking by, and the blind people say, hey, Jesus, heal us. Make us so we can see. Make us so we can see. And then the crowd who's around them are saying, will you guys be quiet? Gosh, stop annoying Jesus. I think even the disciples are like this. They're like, be quiet, stop annoying Jesus. What do the blind people do? The crowd, remember, again we have the crowd. So if they were if they were second quadrant oriented, they would stop right then, and they would behave and they would be quiet. But no, they don't listen to the crowd. They start to shout louder. They say, Jesus, heal us, make us so we're not blind. And then Jesus turns around and says, you guys can see. And then they can see. So once again, we have this metaphor of the crowd. You're breaking out of the crowd. You're breaking out of what other people expect of you, the belonging, and then you're healed. So what I'm saying is Jesus healing is metaphorical of, breaking out of the crowd, and then this is the flow. You're breaking out. And interestingly, like I said, people say that there is such thing as blindness that has no biological component to it, and it's just psychological. And if you think about it, this is what Freud talks about. There's actually 4 types of defense mechanisms. Once again, we have the quadrant model. But Freud says that it's a defense mechanism. These sometimes people become blind as a defense mechanism. Why? Because we're living in a society that is stressful. And what's a good way to break out of the society? Some people do it by becoming blind. Some people do it by becoming paralyzed. It's a defense mechanism. It's not always the case. Sometimes there is biological component, but there is cases where there's self-induced blindness or self-induced paralysis or self-induced craziness. Sometimes people become crazy so they can break out of, and it's not always the case, but they become crazy because think about it. If you're crazy, then there's all these people expecting things of you, demanding things of you, and then you can kind of break free of all this by being quote unquote crazy. Franz Kafka had a book where, interestingly, I love this. Kafka wanted to have all his books destroyed at his death. But the guy who he told him to do this, he didn't destroy the books. He ended up having them published. Once again, Kafka, when he was writing, he was in the zone. When he was writing, he wasn't thinking, hey, I want to write so other people can know how wonderful I am. This is the way when I wrote my raps, is the same type of thing. And I actually threw away or my mom ended up throwing away, but it's a different story. But a lot of the raps. But Kafka, he was like, throw away my stuff. When he was writing, he was in the zone. He wasn't writing to impress other people. He didn't have any goal in mind. He was just writing, and looking at what he wrote. It's beautiful stuff. So, but anyways, Kafka had a story where he became a bug. And people say that this was he was talking about capitalism, and everybody expected so much of Kafka in the capitalistic society, but Kafka wanted to break free of it. So how did he do it? He transformed into a bug, and then everybody could just leave him alone, because now he's a bug. He doesn't have to deal with conformity and deal with all the demands of people around him. All right, and also people say that Kafka was an NT, probably an INTP, the fourth quadrant. So we have, okay, so what was I talking about? Okay, here's another example. There's this pool, and when I went to Israel, I got to go in one of these pools, and people actually believe this works. They're supposed to heal you. But there's this pool in Israel where people who are crippled, they can run to this pool. And if you jump inside of the pool, then when it bubbles up, then you're healed. If you think about it, this is what's called the placebo effect. What happens is someone runs into the pool, he jumps into the bubbling water, and then he thinks if you believe it's going to help you, then it does help you, because belief is very powerful. Remember, the second quadrant in healing you, the second quadrant is about order and maintaining homeostasis and stuff, and it can heal you if you believe something. It makes things easier for you. It makes things more difficult to contemplate, have passion flow, and know. But is that necessarily bad for things to be more difficult? That's a question that we're going to raise. But so the people, they jump into this watering pool, and then they're healed. And also think about it. The person it's always the first person who gets into the pool who's healed. And that's the way that it works. If you're the first person to get to the pool when it bubbles up, then you're healed. So the idea is, think about it. Who's going to be the first person to get in the pool? The person who's not really that badly hurt. So the person with the hurt finger, the guy who jammed his finger, he's going to be the first one to get in the pool. And he's going to get out of the pool. He's going to say, hey, my finger feels better. But the guy who's crippled, he's not going to be the first person to get in the pool, because he's crippled. So he's not going to be healed. So there's a guy who's crippled, and he's sitting near the pool, and he's waiting for it to start to bubble. And then Jesus walks up to him. He's like, hey, what's going on? This isn't the exact words, but I'm just paraphrasing. And then the guy says, Jesus, I wait here all the time, and nobody will help me. Nobody will help me get into the pool when it bubbles. And, everybody gets into the pool before me. So he's thinking in terms of the competitive mindset and the mindset of capitalism, kind of, quote unquote, where, I got to get there first, and why won't anybody help me out? The socialist mindset type of thing. Like, I want someone to help me out, and, I want to compete with these other people, and I want to be healed by competing. And then Jesus says, so this guy says, and because of this, I can never get healed. And then Jesus says, you are healed now. And then the guy's healed. And the idea is, the reason why he was healed, because he recognized the reason why he's never can be healed is because he has this competitive mindset. This is the way that I interpret the Bible. You could interpret it as literal too if you want. I don't mind if people interpret this stuff as literal, but I see it as metaphorical. This guy recognizes, the competition has never healed me. In fact, maybe once again, like I told you, people have self-induced paralysis psychologically. Maybe he was paralyzed because of the competition, because he wanted to outdo everybody. He had no flow. He had no passion. He was so worried about what other people think about him. It was self-induced paralysis. And then Jesus said, and then he recognizes that this is the reason why he's paralyzed, and that he's never going to be healed by thinking this way. And then he's healed. It's metaphorical. That might go over some people's heads, but if you go throughout the whole Bible, you see the same thing. I'll give some examples. Yeah, okay, I'll take that. Yes, please. Yeah. I'll give some examples of this in the Old Testament. So, a king goes to see Elijah, and this king has leprosy. And Elijah tells him, the king travels a really far distance. He's a Gentile king, and he asks Elijah, I heard that you are a great, prophet, and I hear that you can help me out, that you can heal me. Can you do this for me? And Elijah tells this king, he's traveled a long distance to get healed. And Elijah says, you know what? Go to the Jordan River, dip yourself into the Jordan River, and you'll be healed. And the king says, what are you talking about? I came all the way over here. He doesn't say this exactly, but this is the way it seems. He says, he came all the way over there, and here this guy is just telling him to dip himself in the Jordan River. This is, what does that seem like, just dipping yourself in the Jordan River? This guy's a king. He deserves an incense treatment with, special oils and all this wonderful stuff and some magical potions that are going to heal him. He expects some really good stuff. And here Elijah tells him just to dip himself in the Jordan River. And the king's like, no way. I'm not going to do that. And then so then he goes off, but then the king thinks, So once again, we have this king who's arrogant. He has no humility. The flow is, if you flow, you're humble because you're not worried about what other people think about you. You're not trying to impress people. You're humble. Well, this king is thinking, man, I'm not going to stoop myself to that level where I dip myself in the Jordan River. I'm a king. But then he thinks, okay, I'm going to do it. So he goes to the Jordan River. He dips himself in the Jordan River and his leprosy is healed. So this is another way to look at it. So he humbled himself and then he becomes healed. So this is the way that I look at the way that these texts can be interpreted. I didn't make this stuff up. I've been going to a lot of churches, and the churches say the same stuff. They say that, while the churches say that these things literally happen, they also say that there's this metaphorical meaning. So don't think I'm like coming up with any grand, wonderful new ideas. No, this stuff has always been taught. But I think it's a powerful way to look at this stuff. So I'm going to continue on with more hopefully in a minute.